Eleanor Moore sat in the dark office of Moore and Associates, the dim light from her computer screen casting shadows on her face, highlighting the dark circles beneath her eyes. On her desk sat a stack of warning letters from the bank, overdue bills, and an old newspaper with a headline that felt like a knife to the heart. Moore and Associates drowns in failed investment. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms, trying to hold back the helplessness choking her chest. 5 months ago, Elena had bet the future of her firm on an investment fund she believed could revive her dream. A sharp attorney, she had analyzed every clause, evaluated every risk, but she hadn't foreseen the deception. The fund was a trap, and now her firm, the product of years of relentless work, stood on the brink of bankruptcy. She had poured her personal savings into paying staff salaries, keeping the lights on, but it still wasn't enough. Her mother's hospital bills at St. Mary's and her younger brother Ethan's tuition at Yale felt like heavy stones crushing her shoulders. She closed her eyes, picturing her mother's faint smile in the hospital bed, her hoarse voice whispering, "You make me proud." Then Ethan, always trying to make her laugh, even when he knew their family was struggling. Elena had sworn to protect them, to never let money define who she was. But now she had only weeks before the bank seized her office, before her dream slipped away. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. Mia, her assistant, poked her head in, her eyes glinting with curiosity. "Ms. Moore, someone from Blackwood Enterprises is here. He says it's urgent. No appointment." Elena frowned. Blackwood Enterprises, the financial empire that every lawyer both admired and feared. She smoothed her hair, took a deep breath to steady herself. "Send him in." The door opened, and Adrian Blackwood stepped inside. He wore a black suit, his piercing blue eyes scanning the small office like he was evaluating merchandise. He was tall, but it wasn't his height that made Elena uneasy. It was his overwhelming presence, like everything around him was meant to bend to his will. "Attorney Moore," Adrian said, his voice deep and steady, "I have a proposal. Sit down." Elena crossed her arms, standing tall, eyes locked on his. "This is my office, Mr. Blackwood. If you have something to say it, but keep it short." A ghost of a smile flickered on Adrian's lips, cold as winter wind. He pulled out a chair and sat, his movements unhurried, as if he controlled time itself. "I like directness." "Good. I need a wife for 6 months, and I want you." Elena blinked, then let out a dry, humorless laugh. "I'm a lawyer, not a casting agent for your publicity stunt. If this is some PR ploy, count me out." "This is no stunt," Adrian replied, sliding a folder across the desk. "Marriage contract, 6 months. You'll live with me, appear publicly as my wife, and maintain absolute discretion. In return, I'll pay a large sum, enough to save your firm and more. The money will be transferred upon signing." The phrase, "enough to save your firm," made Elena's heart pound. A large sum, enough to pay off the bank, keep the office open, cover her mother's hospital bills, Ethan's tuition, and maybe give her a chance to start over. But she quickly regained her composure, pushing the folder away like it was dangerous. "Why me? Blackwood Enterprises has a whole team of attorneys. I'm sure you're not short on volunteers." Adrian tilted his head, studying her like an unreadable book. "I need someone who fits my image. You're a talented attorney, known for your integrity. No scandals, no social climbing. Your reputation, strong, independent, is exactly what I need to convince the board." He paused, his gaze sharpening. "And I know your firm is collapsing after a failed investment. You need this opportunity, Ms. Moore. I'm offering you a way out." His words cut like a blade. Elena clenched her fists, trying to keep her voice steady. "You investigated me," she said, her tone low but sharp. "You think you can walk in here, throw money around, and buy my dignity?" "Not your dignity," Adrian replied calmly. "Just 6 months. My father passed away 3 weeks ago. His will requires me to be married to retain the chairman's seat. If I'm not, the board will vote me out. I chose you because you're perfect for the role, on paper and in public." Elena turned away, not wanting him to see the tears threatening to spill. She thought about the sleepless nights, going over the investment documents again and again, blaming herself for being too trusting. She thought about the dream of building Moore and Associates, a place where she hoped to fight for those without a voice. She thought about her mother and Ethan, the people she couldn't let down. And she thought about herself, the woman who once swore she'd never bow to money. But reality is merciless. Her firm was dying. If she didn't act, she'd lose everything. Her dream, her family, even her pride. She turned back, picked up the pen, her hand trembling slightly. If I sign, I want an additional clause. No touching me, no interfering with my work. And when 6 months end, you walk out of my life forever. Adrian nodded as if he'd expected it. Agreed. Elena signed, her handwriting sharp, her heart heavy. She slid the contract back to him, locking eyes with him. Mr. Blackwood, you may be buying my image, but you will never own who I am. He took the contract and stood. For the first time, Elena noticed a strange flicker in his eyes. Not triumph, but something like a question he had never considered. You're wrong, Attorney Moore, he said quietly. I don't want who you are. I only need your shadow. He turned and walked out, leaving her alone with the echo of her heartbeat and the feeling that she had just lost a piece of herself. You're watching Soul Stories, where every tale whispers of love, healing, and hope. If you believe that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life, and that love often arrives when we least expect it, don't forget to subscribe and be part of our journey. Now stay with us. The story is just beginning. Chapter 2. Living with a Stranger. Elena stood in the middle of Adrian Blackwood's penthouse, her entire luggage consisting of a single small suitcase. The apartment was massive, perched atop a shimmering glass tower, offering a sweeping view of the city. The marble floors gleamed, and the silver-gray furniture exuded luxury, but the space felt cold, like a showroom. No photos, no plants, no trace of human warmth. Wrapping her arms around herself, she felt as if she had just stepped into a modern mausoleum. This is your room, Adrian said, pointing toward a door at the end of the hallway. His voice remained deep and sharp, like he was reading a business report. Mine is across the hall. The wardrobe is stocked with clothes for public events. You may use the kitchen and living room, but stay out of my study. Elena nodded without looking at him. Understood. I won't bother you. She rolled her suitcase toward the room, walking stiffly, doing her best to maintain the invisible distance she had created from the moment they signed the contract. This wasn't a home, it was a stage, and she, an unwilling actress, had to play the perfect wife for 6 months. Her room was twice the size of her old law office, with a king-sized bed, white silk curtains, and floor-to-ceiling windows. But she didn't feel comfortable. Everything was too perfect, too foreign, like it had been designed to impress, not to be lived in. She sat on the bed, opened her suitcase, and pulled out a small photo frame. Her mother and Ethan, smiling brightly in the park last year. She placed the frame on the bedside table and whispered, "Just 6 months. Mom, Ethan, we'll be okay." Inside, she knew she was lying to herself. Signing that contract with Adrian wasn't just about saving Moore and Associates from a disastrous investment or earning a large sum to pay off debts and support her family. It meant living with a man who saw her as a tool, not a person. She thought back to the day she signed the contract, his eyes cold, yet flickering with something strange. She wondered if there was anything behind that icy facade, or if it was just her imagination. That evening, Elena stepped into the kitchen, deciding to cook a simple meal to regain a sense of normalcy. She found a pack of spaghetti and a few ingredients in the fridge, likely left by a housekeeper. As the water began to boil, she heard footsteps. Adrian appeared in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly tousled, like he had just come out of a long meeting. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice laced with genuine surprise. "Cooking," Elena replied without looking up, continuing to stir the pot. "Want some?" "Just spaghetti with tomato sauce. Nothing fancy." Adrian frowned as if the concept of cooking was completely foreign to him. "I have a private chef. You don't need to do that." "I'm not doing it for you," Elena said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm doing it for me. If I have to live here for 6 months, I need to feel human, not like a decorative object." She poured the pasta onto a plate, added sauce, and sat at the dining table, ignoring him completely. Adrian stood there watching her. For the first time, he noticed something. Elena wasn't trying to impress him. No flattery, no nervousness, no awe that he was the CEO of Blackwood Enterprises. She ate her pasta, eyes focused on her plate, but there was something natural about her that he couldn't look away from. He thought about the women he'd met, always seeking his approval, always seeing him as a prize. But Elena, she looked at him like a stranger, and that made him uneasy. "You're not like most lawyers," he said suddenly, sitting down in the chair across from her. Elena paused her chewing and looked up. "What do you mean?" "Lawyers are usually calculated, cold. You're making pasta in my kitchen like this is your home." His voice held a hint of teasing, but his eyes were serious, as if trying to figure her out. Elena set down her fork and gave a faint smile. "Mr. Blackwood, if you think all lawyers are cold and calculated, then you haven't met someone like me. I work with logic, but I live with my heart. And if you want me to play your perfect wife, then let me breathe. Don't turn me into a machine." Her words left Adrian silent. He looked at her, his gaze flickering. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't trying to please him. And that was new. He stood ready to leave, but then paused, glancing at the plate of pasta on the table. "It doesn't smell bad," he said hesitantly, as if admitting anything at all was foreign to him. Elena pushed a plate toward him, her eyes daring. "Try it. I promise I'm not poisoning you." Adrian hesitated, then sat down and picked up a fork. He took a bite, slowly, as if analyzing every element. "Acceptable," he said, but the corner of his mouth twitched into the faintest smile, almost unconscious. Elena watched him, suddenly noticing how that smile made him seem more human. She quickly looked away, reminding herself, "This is a contract, Elena. Don't forget." But in that moment, she felt a flicker of warmth creep into the cold space of the penthouse. That night, as Elena lay in bed, she thought about Adrian, not the CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, but the man who had just eaten pasta in her kitchen. She wondered if he had ever truly lived as himself, or if his whole life had been a contract too. She shook her head and pulled the blanket over herself, trying to dismiss the thought. But deep down, she knew the walls she had built were beginning to crack. Meanwhile, Adrian stood in his study, staring out at the city through the glass. He thought about Elena, the woman who didn't admire him, didn't fear him, and made pasta like it was the most natural thing in the world. For the first time, his apartment didn't feel like just a place to exist. He shook his head and told himself, "It's just a contract." But a small part of him, very small, began to wonder if her shadow could become something more. Elena stood before the mirror in the lavish penthouse bedroom, wearing a sapphire evening gown that hugged her figure, elegant, strong, and poised. The dress was one of the outfits Adrian had prepared for her, and though she hated to admit it, it made her feel like someone from a dream that wasn't hers. She smoothed her hair and reminded herself, "This is just a role. Don't let it consume you." Tonight she would make her first public appearance as Mrs. Adrian Blackwood at the city's most prestigious charity gala. Adrian was waiting in the living room, sharp in a tailored black suit. His gaze swept over her as she walked in. "You look suitable," he said evenly, though his eyes lingered a beat too long. "Just suitable?" Elena replied lightly but with an edge, offering a faint smirk. "I thought you picked me for the perfect image." She brushed past him without waiting for a response, feeling a flicker of satisfaction when he hesitated. In the car, silence stretched between them, the only sound the quiet hum of the engine. Elena stared out the window as the city lights passed like falling stars. Her thoughts wandered to her law firm, to the exhausting days spent trying to pull it back from the edge after the failed investment. Signing the contract with Adrian had been her way out, but the deeper she went into his world, the more she felt like a bird trapped in a golden cage. She glanced at Adrian. He was reading emails on his phone, face cold and unreadable. Does he ever feel like he's pretending too? She wondered, then quickly pushed the thought away. At the gala, the ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and opulent gowns. Elena felt every eye turn toward them as they entered, her arm lightly linked with Adrian's, just as the script required. Whispers followed them, about her, about Adrian, about their sudden marriage. She kept a flawless smile, though inside she was fighting a battle between pride and the part she had to play. And then she saw her, Vanessa Reed, Adrian's ex-girlfriend, standing amidst the crowd in a blazing red dress like fire. Vanessa was the epitome of high society, wealthy, arrogant, and once the center of attention beside Adrian before their breakup. She approached with a sweet smile and eyes sharp as blades. "Adrian, it's been too long," Vanessa said, then turned to Elena, her gaze scanning from head to toe. "And this is Ms. Moore, right? A lawyer, I've heard. Quite a surprise to see you here, next to him. I thought he preferred women who were more fitting for this world." The surrounding crowd fell silent, listening. Elena felt heat rise in her face, but she wasn't one to back down. She smiled, calm and cutting. "Ms. Reed, I'm not here to fit into anyone's world. I'm here because I chose to be. And as for being fitting, I think someone who once walked away from Mr. Blackwood knows just how hard that is to define." A soft ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Vanessa stiffened, her smile vanishing. The nearby press began jotting notes, cameras flashing. Elena felt Adrian's hand gently tighten around her arm, but she didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed locked on Vanessa. "And by the way," she added, "this gala is for orphan children. If you're looking for attention, why not auction something off? I've heard you're quite generous." Vanessa went pale, mumbled something, then turned and left, the crowd dispersing. Elena exhaled sharply, heart pounding. She'd won the exchange, but felt strangely hollow. What am I doing? Protecting my dignity or just playing the part? Adrian pulled her aside to a quiet corner, his expression unreadable. "You didn't have to do that," he said, voice low. "Vanessa just wanted to provoke you." "I didn't do it for you," Elena replied, her voice slightly shaking. "I did it for me. I won't let anyone look down on me, not in your world or anywhere else." She turned away, but Adrian caught her hand, his fingers warm, a stark contrast to his usual cold tone. "You did well," he said, and for the first time Elena saw a flicker of sincerity in his eyes. "But in this crowd, they're like wolves. Don't let them see you flinch." Before she could respond, a wave of reporters surged forward, blinding camera flashes lighting up the room. Elena felt overwhelmed, the noise of microphones and questions crashing down like waves. "Mrs. Blackwood, how did your romance begin? Is it true you married for love?" She stood frozen, her smile plastered on, unsure how to answer without exposing the contract. Suddenly, Adrian stepped forward, pulling her into his arms, one hand protectively resting on her shoulder. "My wife doesn't enjoy the spotlight," he said, voice calm but commanding, quieting the press. "She's here because of her heart, not your cameras." He took her hand, guiding her through the crowd, each step building an invisible wall around them. When they reached a quiet balcony, Adrian let go and turned away, as if the embrace had been purely instinctive. Elena stood there, heart racing, not because of the crowd, but because of that unexpected hug. She had felt his warmth, his protection, something she hadn't asked for, but she reminded herself, "Don't be foolish, Elena. It was part of the performance." "You didn't have to do that," she said hoarsely, trying to sound composed. "I could have handled it." Adrian looked at her, his gaze deep. "I know, but I didn't want you to have to." He paused as if surprised by his own words. Then he turned away, leaving her with a storm of emotions. That night, standing on the balcony, Elena looked down at the glittering city. She thought of Vanessa, of Adrian's embrace, of herself, struggling to keep the boundaries she had built. She hugged her shoulders, whispering to herself, "It's just a contract. Don't let your heart get involved." But deep down, she knew something inside her had already shifted. Back in the ballroom, Adrian watched her from a distance. He thought of the moment she stood up to Vanessa, strong, yet visibly wounded. For the first time, he asked himself, who is she, beyond the shadow I need? He shook his head and rejoined the crowd, but a part of him couldn't forget the feeling of holding her, as if, just in that fleeting moment, he wasn't a CEO, but simply a man. Chapter 3. A Dream of a Family. Elena sat in the penthouse living room, her laptop open in front of her, the screen displaying an email from the bank confirming a loan extension for Moore and Associates. A small step forward, but she knew it was only temporary. The firm was still a sinking ship, and her contract with Adrian Blackwood remained the lifeline she didn't want to cling to forever. She clicked the email shut, trying not to think about Adrian's unexpected embrace at the charity gala last week. The warmth of his hand still haunted her, though she kept reminding herself it was just part of the performance. The phone rang, cutting through her thoughts. An unknown number, but the voice on the line, Adrian's assistant, was urgent. "Ms. Moore, Mr. Blackwood's been injured. At company headquarters. It's not serious, but you should come." Elena shot up, her heart racing. "What happened? Is he okay?" She didn't understand why her voice trembled, why she felt worried about a man she considered nothing more than a contract partner. The assistant explained quickly. An elevator accident. Adrian had pulled an employee away before the doors collapsed, but a metal bar had grazed his shoulder. He refused to go to the hospital, just went back to the penthouse, the assistant said, concern in her tone. When Elena arrived at Blackwood Enterprises, Adrian was already in the car, seated in the back. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, stained with a small patch of blood. He was frowning, still trying to maintain control. "You didn't need to come," he said as soon as he saw her, his voice cold but weaker than usual. "It's just a scratch." Elena crossed her arms, her expression stern. "Scratches don't make you go pale, Mr. Blackwood. Get in. I'm taking you home." She climbed in beside him, ignoring his annoyed look, and instructed the driver to return to the penthouse. Once home, Elena practically forced Adrian onto the sofa. She retrieved the first aid kit from the cabinet, her movements efficient, like she'd done this 100 times before. "Take your shirt off," she said, her tone calm but non-negotiable. Adrian raised a brow but eventually complied, revealing a wound on his shoulder. Not deep, but enough to need stitches if treated at a hospital. Elena disinfected the injury, her touch gentle but firm. She could feel Adrian's gaze on her, but she didn't look up. "You didn't need to play hero," she said softly. "That employee would have been fine if you'd called a technician. Why risk it?" Adrian was quiet for a moment before replying, his voice raspy. "I didn't think. I just reacted." He turned his face away, as if he didn't want her to see whatever flickered in his eyes. Elena finished dressing the wound, then noticed his body beginning to tremble, not from pain, but from fever. She touched his forehead, burning hot. "You've got a fever," she said, rising to grab medicine and a thin blanket. "Lie down. No arguments." This time, Adrian didn't protest. He lay on the sofa, eyes closed, his breathing heavy. Elena sat beside him, tucking the blanket around him, then used a damp cloth to cool his forehead. She didn't know why she was doing this, why she couldn't just leave him be. Maybe it reminded her of the nights caring for her sick mother, of how her mother once said, "Taking care of someone is how you keep your heart alive." She shook her head. "This isn't care, it's just duty." Late into the night, as the city lights glowed faintly through the windows, Adrian began murmuring in his sleep. His voice was low but clear, like a lost child's. "Mom, don't go. Don't leave me again." He clutched the edge of the blanket, his face twisted in pain that had nothing to do with his shoulder. Elena froze. She stared at him. The man who always had everything under control, now vulnerable like a boy left behind. She thought about what she knew of him, a father's death, a forced inheritance clause, but no one ever mentioned his mother. She placed a gentle hand on his and whispered, "I'm here. No one's leaving you." She didn't know if he heard, but slowly his grip loosened and his breathing steadied. She stayed with him all night, never sleeping, just replacing the cold compress and watching over him. In the darkness, her thoughts drifted to herself, to the betrayal she endured 4 years ago, when her ex left her for money. She'd learned to lock her heart away. But watching Adrian, she wondered, if he's locked his heart too, who will ever open it? The thought scared her. She stood, walked to the balcony, and breathed in the cold air to steady the emotions surging inside. The next morning, Adrian woke, the fever having broken. He saw Elena sitting in a nearby chair with a cup of coffee, dark circles under her eyes. "You stayed all night?" he asked, his voice hoarse, eyes flickering with something like embarrassment. "Don't flatter yourself," Elena replied coolly. "I just didn't want you dying in my house and voiding the contract." She stood and walked toward the kitchen, but her heart pounded. She didn't tell him about the things he'd mumbled, about the pain she saw. She didn't want him to know she had seen him so exposed. Adrian watched her go, a strange feeling rising in his chest. He vaguely remembered a soft voice in the night, a warm hand. He shook his head, telling himself it had been a fever dream. But when Elena returned and placed a simple plate of scrambled eggs in front of him, he realized something. She hadn't cared for him because he was the CEO, or because of the contract. She had done it because she was Elena. "Thank you," he said quietly. For the first time in his life, the word felt insufficient. Elena shrugged, but her eyes wavered. "Eat, before it gets cold." She turned away, but inside she knew. The line between them had just become a little thinner. That night, lying in bed, Elena thought of Adrian. Not the cold man in a black suit, but the boy who had whispered for his mother. She reminded herself, "Don't let feelings get involved, Elena." But she couldn't deny it. She had seen a part of his true self, and it made her heart ache. In his study, Adrian looked out at the city, his fingers brushing the bandage on his shoulder. He thought about Elena, the woman who hadn't walked away when he was at his weakest. For the first time, he asked himself, what if this contract isn't just a transaction? He shook his head and closed his laptop, but a part of him couldn't forget the gentle voice from the fevered night. Elena stood in the penthouse kitchen, soft amber lighting casting a gentle glow over the dinner table. Just grilled fish and salad, but she'd spent over an hour preparing it. Not for Adrian, she told herself. For me. Because I need to feel like I still control some small corner of this life. 3 months had passed since the contract was signed, and while she'd grown accustomed to the cold luxury of the apartment, she hadn't gotten used to the way her heart occasionally skipped when Adrian walked into the room. He had changed, though she hated to admit it. Adrian, once the man who vanished into endless late meetings, now usually came home before 8 p.m. He no longer simply nodded when she spoke, but asked about her day. Simple questions like, "How's the firm?" Or, "Did you meet with any clients today?" Sometimes he sat across from her at dinner, eating quietly the food she cooked. And in those moments, she felt unsettled, as if the line between contract and reality was slowly blurring. Tonight, as she placed the dishes on the table, Adrian stepped in, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly tousled. He held a bottle of red wine, and there was a flicker of something unfamiliar in his eyes. "I thought maybe we could have a glass," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "If you don't mind." Elena raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Just one. I don't want to get drunk and forget the terms of our contract." Her smile was dry, but inside she wondered why he suddenly wanted to break routine. They sat across from each other, the chandelier's warm glow softening the room's usual coldness. Adrian poured the wine, the crimson liquid swirling like blood. "For you," he said, sliding her glass over. "And thank you for dinner. You didn't have to cook, but you did." Elena shrugged, trying to remain composed. "I did it for me, not for you. If I don't cook, I'll lose my mind in this mausoleum." She took a sip, the bitter taste spreading across her tongue. "And you? What's with the free evening? No board meetings?" Adrian chuckled quietly, the rare sound catching her off guard. "I wanted to stay home," he said, eyes lingering on her longer than usual. "And I wanted to know more about you. Not attorney Elena Moore, just Elena." The words made her heart thud. She turned away, pretending to focus on her plate. "There's not much to know, Mr. Blackwood. I'm ordinary. I don't belong in your world." She thought of her law firm, of the long days spent trying to save it after the failed investment. She thought of her mother and Ethan, those she fought to protect. And she thought of the betrayal 4 years ago, when the man she loved left her for money. Since then, she had vowed never to let anyone near her heart again. But Adrian didn't relent. "Ordinary doesn't mean unremarkable," he said, voice low. "You cook pasta in my kitchen, put Vanessa in her place in front of 100 people, took care of me when I had a fever. That's not ordinary, that's you." Elena looked up and his gaze locked on hers. Not cold, but warm, almost sincere. Her breath slowed, the space between them seeming to shrink. "Don't do this," she said hoarsely. "Don't pretend this isn't a contract." Adrian said nothing, but he stood and walked toward her. He stopped close, too close, his breath brushing her hair. "I'm not pretending," he murmured so softly she could feel each word. "I don't know what I'm doing, Elena, but I know I don't want to look at you like a shadow anymore." Before she could respond, Adrian leaned in, and his lips met hers. The kiss wasn't rushed, wasn't possessive. It was gentle, like he was asking a silent question. Elena froze, logic screaming at her to stop, but her heart, the part she had locked away for so long, answered instead. She didn't push him away, didn't move, just let the moment linger, the warmth of him spreading through her. At last she pulled back, her breath unsteady. "Don't let feelings override the contract," she whispered, her voice fragile, as if trying to convince herself. She looked at him, expecting a scoff or for him to turn cold, but Adrian simply stood there, his eyes deep, as if seeing straight through her. "I'm not so sure anymore," he said, his voice rough, almost pained. "I'm not sure I want this to just be a contract anymore." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, clutching her wine glass, her heart pounding. Elena sat down, trying to regain composure. She thought about the kiss, about how he said her name, not Attorney Moore, but Elena. She thought about the night he had a fever, whispering his mother's name, and the embrace at the gala. Every moment chipped away at her defenses, but she was afraid. Afraid that if she opened her heart again, it would break just like before. She stood, began clearing the table slowly, trying to chase away the storm inside. In his study, Adrian stood by the window, looking out at the city. He touched his lips, where her warmth still lingered. He thought of his mother, who left when he was just a boy, and his father, who taught him emotions were a weakness. He had lived his whole life controlling everything. But Elena, she made him lose control. He remembered her eyes when she pulled back, strong but vulnerable. For the first time he wondered, if this wasn't a contract, would I be brave enough to let her into my life? That night, Elena lay in bed staring at the framed photo of her mother and Ethan. She whispered, "Mom, what should I do?" She knew she was at a crossroads, keep her heart safe or risk it to feel again. She closed her eyes, but Adrian's image didn't fade. Meanwhile, in the darkness of the study, Adrian opened an old drawer and took out a silver necklace, the last gift from his mother before she left. He held it tightly, thinking of Elena. "I'm not so sure anymore," he repeated aloud. And this time he knew. He wasn't just saying it to her. He was saying it to his own heart. Chapter 4. The Curse of Trust. Elena sat in her temporary office at Blackwood Enterprises headquarters, the blue glow from her computer screen casting sharp shadows across her focused face. As a legal advisor, she had been tasked by Adrian with overseeing investment contracts tied to the company's international expansion project. It was part of their marriage contract, a way for her to be useful beyond playing the role of the perfect wife. But today, she didn't feel useful. She felt like she was standing before an invisible wall, uncertain whether what lay beyond it was the truth or a carefully constructed lie. It had been 3 days since that moment in the kitchen, since Adrian's lips touched hers. Ever since, Elena had tried to rebuild the boundary between them. Each morning, she avoided his gaze, answered his questions with clipped responses, and ate dinner alone in her room. That kiss, gentle though it was, had scared her. Not because of him, but because of herself. She remembered 4 years ago, when her ex had walked out for a wealthier opportunity, leaving her with a shattered heart and a vow. Never let emotions overrule logic again. But Adrian, with his hoarse whisper, "I'm not sure anymore," was shaking that foundation, and that terrified her. She shook her head, refocusing on the document displayed on her screen. An investment agreement with a Cayman-based financial institution caught her attention. The sum involved was substantial, but the details were vague. No name project, no due diligence report. As a lawyer, she was trained to spot red flags. She opened the data analysis software she'd once used at her firm, cross-referencing figures. After an hour, she found something unusual. A $12 million transfer funneled through 3 intermediary accounts, ultimately landing in an untraceable shell company. Elena's heart pounded. Transactions like these could be legal, but they could also conceal something far worse: money laundering, tax evasion, or something even darker. She printed the file, marked the inconsistencies, and headed for Adrian's office. She needed answers, not just for her job, but because some part of her wanted to believe he wasn't hiding things, that he wasn't the kind of man she feared he might be. Adrian sat behind his desk, the sunlight from the window accentuating the sharp lines of his face. He looked up as she entered, his eyes lighting briefly, then returning to their usual composure. "What do you need, Elena?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. She placed the document on his desk, pointing to the marked section. "This transfer, $12 million, through 3 intermediaries, ending in a Cayman company. No due diligence, no declared purpose. What do you know about it?" Adrian glanced at the file, his expression unreadable. "It's an internal transaction. You don't need to worry about it," he said evenly, though Elena detected a subtle tension beneath his tone. She crossed her arms, her voice sharp. "I'm your legal advisor. If there's risk, I need to know. Transactions like this will draw SEC scrutiny. Do you expect me to do my job without the truth?" Adrian stood and walked to the window, turning his back to her. "I said it's nothing. Just do your part." His voice was cold, but Elena heard it, an edge of avoidance, something she had never seen from the man who seemed to control everything. Her hands clenched at her sides. It felt like a splash of cold water. She had started to believe he was different, that behind his icy exterior was someone worth trusting. But his evasion now felt like a warning, reviving the fear of being deceived. She turned away, her voice quiet but firm. "If you don't trust me enough to tell me the truth, don't expect me to trust you." That night in her room, Elena opened her laptop and accessed Blackwood Enterprises' internal system using the password Adrian had given her. She knew she was crossing a line, but she couldn't stop. As a lawyer, she had learned to seek truth, even when it hurt. After 3 hours of digging, she found a set of encrypted emails. When she decrypted them, her name appeared in several legal documents connected to the transfer. Not as a consultant, but as an authorized representative. She slammed the laptop shut, hands trembling. If the transaction came under investigation, her name would be implicated, without her ever knowing. She thought of Moore and Associates, of the months spent clawing to keep it alive after the failed investment. She had signed this contract with Adrian to protect that dream, to secure money for her family. But now she felt like she'd stepped into a trap, and the man who'd set it was the one she'd just begun to trust. She rose and stepped out onto the balcony, looking down at the glittering city. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Trust is a gift, but also a curse. She had allowed herself to trust Adrian, not just as a business partner, but as a person. The man who pulled an employee from a collapsing elevator. The man who ate her pasta. The man who looked at her like she was the only one in the room. But now she asked herself, what's his truth? And why am I part of this game? In his study, Adrian sat at his desk, his fingers wrapped tightly around the silver necklace his mother had left him. He thought about Elena's question, about the look in her eyes when she left his office. He wanted to tell her the truth, that the transfer was part of a defensive strategy to shield the company from hostile shareholders, that her name had been added to protect her if the plan collapsed. But he couldn't. Trusting someone, for him, meant exposing weakness. It meant repeating the mistake of his mother leaving him. He remembered the way she stood up to Vanessa, the way she dabbed his forehead when he had a fever. She wasn't just a shadow he had hired, she was Elena, and that scared him. He wondered, if she knew the truth, would she stay, or would she leave, like everyone else? He closed the drawer and stood, but the image of Elena wouldn't leave his mind. In the dark, Elena opened the photo frame of her mother and Ethan and whispered, "I'm sorry, but I have to know the truth." She knew she was stepping into dangerous territory, but she couldn't turn back, not because of the contract, but because her heart, no matter how much she tried to deny it, had started asking, if he's sincere, why is he hiding this from me? Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home, to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. Chapter 5. The Trap of Trust. Elena sat in the penthouse bedroom, the dim light from the nightstand lamp casting a glow over the documents clutched in her hands. The words on the pages cut like knives. Her name, Elena Moore, was listed on a series of legal documents tied to Blackwood Enterprises investment transactions. Not as a legal advisor, but as an authorized representative. A perfect scapegoat if the Securities and Exchange Commission ever investigated. She trembled, not from fear, but from the crushing weight of betrayal constricting her chest. She had spent the entire day investigating, digging through internal emails and files. The transactions weren't clearly illegal, but they were risky, and they pushed all the legal liability toward her. As his legal wife and in-house counsel, she could be accused of complicity or professional misconduct if this ever came to light. She thought of Moore and Associates, the law firm she had sacrificed her pride to protect. She had signed that contract with Adrian to save it, but now she felt like a pawn in his carefully played game. She thought of her mother, how she used to hold Elena's hand in the small church and teach her that faith in people was a guiding flame, but one that could easily be extinguished if placed in the wrong hands. Elena had started to trust Adrian, not just as a business partner, but as the man who saved an employee from a collapsing elevator, who ate the pasta she cooked, who kissed her like she was the only thing that mattered. But now she wondered, was my faith blind? She stood gripping the documents and walked to Adrian's study. He sat there, the light from his computer casting shadows across his face, revealing a rare weariness. He looked up, surprised to see her. "Elena, it's late. What's wrong?" She set the documents on the desk, her voice calm but razor sharp. "You used my name in these risky investment deals. You listed me as an authorized representative. So if the SEC investigates, I take the fall. Explain that to me." Adrian looked at the papers, his eyes hardening. He stood and walked to the window, turning his back to her. "You misunderstood," he said quietly, but without conviction. "I wasn't trying to hurt you." Elena stepped closer, now only a few feet away. "Misunderstood?" she said, her voice rising. "You hid transactions from me. You signed my name to documents I never saw. Do you really think I'm naive enough not to notice? This isn't about protecting the company, Adrian. This is using me as a shield." He turned, his eyes wavering as if torn between truths. "I trusted you wouldn't betray me," he said hoarsely. "I thought you'd understand. I was trying to protect everything from the predators out there. The board, the shareholders, they want me out. I needed you with me, Elena." His words cut deep, not with anger, but with sorrow. She had entrusted him with something she'd guarded through so much pain, her trust, and he hadn't seen her as a person, just another piece of strategy. She shook her head, tears threatening, but she held them back. "You don't need a wife," she said, voice trembling but firm. "You need a shield, and I thought I was more than that." She removed her wedding ring and set it on the desk. The soft metallic click on the wood sounded like a closing door. Adrian stepped forward, reaching for her, but she pulled back. "Don't," she said, her voice cracking. "Don't make it worse." She turned and walked to the bedroom, pulled out a suitcase and hastily packed a few clothes. When she opened the door to leave, a fax lay on the floor, a notice of preliminary investigation from the SEC. Her name was clearly printed on the front. She picked it up, her hand trembling, then placed it on the table without looking at Adrian, who stood motionless in the hallway. "They know," she said coldly. "Good luck, Mr. Blackwood." She left the penthouse in the middle of the night, stepping into the freezing wind of the city. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away, from the building, from him. She thought of her mother and the times they knelt together in prayer, asking for strength to face darkness. "Mom," she whispered inwardly, "I put my trust in the wrong hands." A single tear fell, but deep inside her, a small flame still burned. The belief in herself and the road she would forge on her own. Back in the penthouse, Adrian stood frozen, staring at the ring on the desk. He picked it up, clenching it tightly until pain shot through his fingers. He thought of his mother, who left him. His father, who taught him trust was weakness. He had tried to protect Elena his way, signing her name to the documents so she wouldn't be targeted by the board if his plan failed. But he had been wrong. She didn't need his protection. She needed the truth. He opened a drawer and took out his mother's silver necklace, gripping it like it could hold him together. He remembered the words of the pastor from that childhood church. True faith isn't control, it's letting go, trusting the truth to lead. He hadn't let go, and now he had lost her. He looked at the facts from the SEC, his heart heavy with regret. She'll never forgive me, he thought, but a part of him still prayed, not for the company, for a chance to make it right. Elena sat in a small cafe, warm yellow lights glowing around her. She pulled out the framed photo of her mother and Ethan and placed it on the table. She didn't know what awaited, investigations, career uncertainty, or the state of her own heart. But she whispered like a prayer, I'll find the way, Mom, even if all I have faith in is myself. She closed her eyes, and in the quiet, she felt something stir, an invisible strength guiding her forward, even as the road ahead was cloaked in shadow. Adrian stood in the silent penthouse, the dim glow of the city casting pale light through the glass windows, illuminating the wedding ring Elena had left on the table. Beside it lay the facts from the Securities and Exchange Commission, her name, Elena Moore, printed like an accusation. She had been gone for more than 12 hours, and for the first time in his life, Adrian felt his world collapse. He had called her, no answer, texted, no reply. The apartment, once cold but warmed by her homemade pasta and quiet presence, now felt like a void swallowing him whole. He clutched the silver necklace from his mother, the only memento from a fractured childhood. He thought of that kiss in the kitchen, of her steady eyes when she stood up to Vanessa, of her gentle voice when she wiped his forehead during the fever. Back then, he believed he was just drawn to her, that she was part of the contract he needed to fulfill. But now, in her absence, he saw the truth with painful clarity. He loved her, not the shadow he hired, not the legal wife on paper, but Elena, the woman who had made his locked heart beat again after years of silence. He remembered the words of the pastor at the small church his mother once took him to. Faith is not about holding on, it's about letting go, to make things right. He had held on to Elena through control, used her name to shield the company, believing she would understand. But she didn't need his protection. She needed the truth, and he had stolen that from her. Love, he now realized, wasn't control. It was the courage to be seen, fully, vulnerably. He drove through the city aimlessly until he found himself in a modest neighborhood. The neon lights of St. Mary's Hospital glowed ahead, the place where Elena's mother was receiving treatment. He didn't know why he was there, only that to find Elena, he had to understand her. Inside, a nurse led him to Grace Moore's room. She lay in bed, wisps of silver hair around her face, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. Mr. Blackwood, she said, voice soft but warm. I suppose you're here about Elena. Adrian stood by the door, fists clenched in his pockets, his voice rough. She's gone. I hurt her. I need to find her. But first, I want to understand who she really is. Grace smiled and gestured toward the chair beside her. Sit. Elena is a child of faith, you know, not just in God, but in people. And that faith has been broken before. She spoke of Elena, the girl who turned down a major law firm scholarship because they required unethical practices. The one who worked day and night to build her own firm, to fight for the unheard. She's walked away from money more than once, Grace said. She wants to stand on her own. When she signed that contract with you, it wasn't for the money. It was for her family, for her dream. Adrian listened, heart heavy. He realized he hadn't just fallen for her strength, but for her heart. A heart that had the courage to give, to believe, even after betrayal. I was wrong, he whispered. I used her name in those deals to protect the company. But I hurt her. Do you know where she is? Grace shook her head gently. Elena will find her way back when she's ready. But if you love her, don't chase her. Make it right first. Faith isn't words, it's action. Her words burned through him. He loved Elena. He knew that as certainly as he knew he couldn't live with her lost forever. Leaving the hospital, he drove straight to the office of James Carver, the former associate behind the Cayman Shell Company. He didn't call ahead. He barged in, dropping the files on the desk. "Re-sign the documents," Adrian said, his voice steel. "Remove Elena Moore's name. Put mine instead. I'll bear all the risk." James raised an eyebrow, smirking. "You've lost your mind, Adrian. If the SEC digs in, you'll lose your chair, maybe even face prison." "I know," Adrian replied, unwavering. "But I love her, and I won't let her pay for my mistakes." He signed each document, the pen in his hand delivering promises, not just of accountability, but of love. When he walked out, dawn had broken, and for the first time in years he felt light, as if the burden he carried had finally been laid down. Back at the penthouse, he sat in the living room, staring at the ring. He thought of his mother, who left him, his father, who taught him control was strength. But Elena, she had shown him that love is the courage to say, "I was wrong," and the will to act for someone else, even when it costs everything. He clutched the silver necklace and whispered, "Mom, I love her, and I'm trying to be worthy." Far from the penthouse, Elena sat in a tiny rented apartment, soft morning light filtering through the window. She opened her laptop and saw the email from Blackwood Enterprises. The documents had been revised, her name removed. Her heart raced. She didn't know the full story, but part of her sensed something had changed. She looked at the photo of her mother and Ethan, remembering her mother's words. "Faith is a flame. It shines brightest after you've walked through the dark." She had walked through darkness when she left, but now she asked herself, if he's trying to make it right, could I believe again? She stepped onto the small balcony, breathing in the crisp morning air. She didn't have all the answers, but she felt something stir inside her, a quiet strength, faith in herself, in the path she'd chosen. She whispered like a prayer, "Mom, I'll find my way, whether it's alone or—" She paused, the image of Adrian flashing in her mind. Back in the penthouse, Adrian slipped the ring into his pocket. He didn't know where Elena was, but he wouldn't stop. He would find her, not to control her, but to tell her he loved her. And with a flicker of hope, however faint, he believed their faith still had a chance to burn bright again. You're watching Soul Stories, created exclusively for our channel. Leave a comment, we read everyone. Subscribe to support more original, heart-touching tales. Thank you for being part of the Soul Stories family. Chapter 6. He came not as a CEO. Elena stood on the stage of the Grand Hotel's Legal Ethics Symposium, the soft stage lights casting a glow on her deep blue suit, highlighting a poised figure tinged with quiet exhaustion. Hundreds of attorneys, judges, and journalists filled the seats below, listening intently as she spoke on professional ethics. "Trust," she said, her voice steady but faintly trembling, "is the heart of justice. But when trust is broken, it leaves wounds deeper than any blade." She paused, took a breath. It felt like she was bearing her soul. It had been a week since she left Adrian's penthouse. Now living in a small rented apartment, Elena was trying to piece her life back together. She knew Adrian had removed her name from the legal documents. An email from Blackwood Enterprises confirmed it. But her heart was still tangled, torn between the pain of being used and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, he truly meant to make things right. She remembered her mother's words from the little church they once attended. "Faith is a flame. It shines when you dare to walk through darkness." She had walked through that darkness the day she took off the ring. But the flame within her still flickered, too afraid to fully ignite. She concluded her speech to a resounding round of applause. She gave a faint smile, stepping down from the podium, when a deep, familiar voice rose from the back of the room. "Excuse me, I'd like to say something." Elena froze. Her heartbeat thundered. Adrian Blackwood stepped onto the stage, not in his usual polished suit, but in a rolled-up white shirt, simple, unguarded. His eyes locked on hers, intense, unwavering, as if the entire world had disappeared but for the space between them. Murmurs spread through the crowd, cameras flashed. Adrian took the mic but didn't look at the audience. He looked only at her, eyes glimmering with something raw and vast. Elena, he began, his voice gravelly with emotion. I used to think I could control everything. My company, my life, even my heart. I built an empire, but in doing so, I lost sight of who I really was. I thought love was something I could buy, something I could bind with a contract. Until you walked into my life and showed me love is a flame that can't be extinguished. You, you are the home I never knew I needed. Elena's hands trembled. She fought to keep her composure, but tears welled. She could feel the sincerity behind every word, as if he were unraveling his soul in front of everyone. He stepped closer, every step a bridge between them. I was wrong, Elena, he said, voice unsteady yet firm. I used your name, kept truths from you, because I was afraid. Afraid that if you saw the real me, weak, wounded, you'd leave. But when you walked away, I realized I can't live without you. Not because of the contract, not because of the company, but because I love you. Love how you make me want to be a better man. The room was silent, but for the pounding of Elena's heart. Adrian dropped to one knee in front of hundreds and pulled from his pocket the wedding ring she had left behind. He held it up, the light catching the metal like it carried his love. I don't deserve you, he said, voice breaking, tears streaming down his face. For the first time she saw him cry. But I can't imagine a day without you. Elena, I love you, not as a CEO, not through a contract, but as a man ready to spend a lifetime earning your heart. Please, give me the chance to love you, to be your home. Elena stood motionless, breath caught in her throat. She looked at him, the man who was once so cold, now kneeling before her, fully vulnerable. She remembered her mother's teachings, that faith wasn't just about believing in others, but also believing in your own heart. She remembered the moments they'd shared, his smile while eating her pasta, his arms shielding her at the gala, his fevered voice whispering her name. And she remembered the pain of leaving, but also the quiet hope she'd felt when he began to make things right. She stepped forward slowly, as if every step was a silent prayer. She stopped in front of him, searching his tear-filled eyes for truth. Adrian, she said softly, voice raspy with emotion, I trusted you. And you hurt me. I've been afraid that trusting again would mean losing myself. But she paused, breathing deeply. Something inside her flared to life. But I believe in the love we can build. I believe in my own heart. And I choose you, not because of any contract, but because I love you. She reached out her hand. He slipped the ring back onto her finger. This time, it wasn't heavy like a legal bind. It was light, like a vow written in love. Adrian stood, pulling her into his arms, holding her like she was everything. I love you, he whispered, lips brushing her hair. Thank you for giving me a home. Elena leaned into him, feeling the warmth of something she had feared to believe in. The crowd applauded, but she didn't hear it. All she could feel was him, and the invisible strength inside her, like the flame her mother spoke of, now blazing bright. They left the hall hand in hand, no words needed. As the sun set in the streaks of golden violet, Adrian turned to her, his eyes soft. I will spend the rest of my life keeping this promise, he said, no matter how hard it gets. Elena smiled, tightening her grip on his hand. Good, because I'm not your shield, Adrian. I'm Elena, and I love you too. She felt like she had found herself again, and more than that, she had found home in him. That night in her small apartment, Elena opened the frame with the photo of her mother and Ethan and whispered, Mom, I found love. I hope you're proud. She felt her mother's smile, as if the flame of her faith still lived on in Elena. In the car ride home, Adrian held the silver necklace in his palm. He remembered the pastor's words, true faith is letting go to truly find. He had let go and found Elena, found love. Mom, he whispered, eyes closed. I've learned how to love. I hope you see me now. And for the first time, he felt the darkness within him dissolve into light. 2 years later, the soft autumn sunlight streamed through the windows of Elena's new law office, nestled in the heart of the city. Moore and Associates had become a respected name, securing major contracts from nonprofits and mid-sized businesses. Elena sat behind her desk, reading a thank you letter from a children's shelter she had recently helped win a court case. She smiled, but deep within, what she felt was gratitude, not just for success, but for the journey that had brought her here. Her mother, Grace, had recovered after surgery and now often stopped by the office with homemade cookies, making the staff burst into laughter. Ethan, her younger brother, had just graduated from Yale and was now interning at a tech firm, calling her every week to excitedly share his latest projects. Elena glanced at the photo of her mother and Ethan on her desk, remembering her mother's words in the little church. Faith is a flame. It shines brightest when you dare to walk through darkness. She had walked through darkness, through a failed investment, a contract marriage with Adrian, and the heartbreak of betrayal, and now that flame in her burned bright. She looked up as Adrian stepped in, sleeves rolled up, his gentle smile still capable of making her heart race like it had on day one. He was no longer the cold CEO of Blackwood Enterprises. After the SEC investigation, he had managed to keep his seat as chairman, but had chosen to relinquish some control to focus on charitable projects. "Ready?" he asked, gesturing toward the door. "The kids at the center are waiting." They headed to a children's shelter Elena had provided legal support for. Today was the charity fair, and Adrian, wearing a silly apron, was handing out sandwiches to the kids, while Elena ran a trivia game. Laughter filled the air, and Elena watched him, this man who had once clung so tightly to power, now letting a little girl tie his hair into cat ears with ribbons. She walked over, wiped a dab of frosting from his cheek, and smiled. "You wear this role better than CEO." Adrian took her hand, his gaze warm. "Only when you're here with me." He pulled her closer, kissing her forehead, uncaring of the people watching. She leaned into him, feeling a quiet power, faith in their love, and in the good they were building together. That weekend, they returned to the penthouse, not a cold mausoleum anymore, but a true home. Over the past 2 years, they had renovated it together, replacing marble floors with warm wood, adding plants and colorful drawings from the children at the shelter. Elena stood in the kitchen where she had once cooked her first pasta meal, watching Adrian hang a new frame, one of them at the charity gala years ago, hand in hand. "To remember where we started," he said softly. Elena smiled, her heart pounding. She reached into her pocket and handed him a small envelope. "And this is to remember where we're going." Adrian frowned in curiosity, opened the envelope, and froze. Inside was an ultrasound photo, a tiny life-taking shape, a glimpse of their future. He looked up at her, eyes brimming with tears. "Elena, is this real?" he asked, his voice trembling, barely daring to believe. She nodded, stepping close and placing her hand on his chest. "If I was ever your shield," she said, voice quivering, "then now I'm the one who will protect your heart, and our child's." Adrian pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as if afraid she might vanish. "I don't deserve this," he whispered, "but I promise to spend my life becoming worthy. Of you, of our baby." He kissed her, tender yet fierce, a vow made without paper or pen. That night they sat on the balcony, gazing out over the glittering city. Elena rested her head on his shoulder, thinking about their journey, from a cold contract to genuine love. She believed now that love wasn't just hope, it was action. It was the choice to love, even after being hurt. And he had let go, surrendered control, and in doing so, found Elena, found family. They sat there, fingers intertwined, saying nothing more. The city below continued to move, but in that moment, there was only them, and a lifetime promise, written in love and growing silently within Elena.